"Ma'am, we're out of lobster bisque and premium steak. You can take the cold sandwich instead." Becky Whitmore didn't whisper. She didn't flinch. She placed the tray on the fold-out table in front of seat 1A like it was any other request. But Celeste Morgan wasn't just any other passenger. She looked at the tray, plastic-wrapped. No linen, no wine, not even an apology. Around her, the soft clinks of caviar spoons and champagne glasses created a silent orchestra of double standards. Seat 1C laughed loudly. 1D was already halfway through his filet mignon. And yet, here she sat, founder of Morgan Tech, global keynote speaker. Forbes-listed CEO offered a meal that didn't belong in first class. Celeste didn't speak. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for the captain or demand a supervisor. She just sat. Becky turned without waiting for a response. The tray remained. In that moment, silence didn't mean surrender. It meant the system was about to be audited, and Becky, still smiling confidently, had no idea she'd just walked into her own reckoning. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The tray sat there like a challenge, plastic edges slightly bent, a sandwich wrapped in cellophane pressed against a paper napkin, no tray linen, no wine, no warmth. Celeste Morgan didn't touch it. She folded her hands neatly in her lap, her legs crossed with poise so natural, so deliberate, it made her seem carved out of confidence. But inside, a storm was shifting quiet, exact, and dangerous. The man in seat 1C, Douglas Radcliffe, CEO of a billion-dollar venture capital firm, grinned as the attendant refilled his champagne. His voice echoed down the aisle, sharp and loud enough to cut through soft classical music. You know, Stratus always knows how to pamper its real clientele. Real clientele. The words didn't need to be aimed directly at her to land. Celeste kept her posture, chin raised just enough to claim presence without invitation. She had learned long ago in first class. Silence wasn't weakness. It was surveillance. Becky Whitmore, the attendant, moved past again. This time, she didn't stop. No eye contact. No offer of alternatives. Just a clipped, "Excuse me," as she reached for a bottle of Merlot for seat 1D. Celeste's eyes followed her. Every step, every preferential glance, every name spoken aloud to the men behind her. She had pre-ordered that meal 7 days ago. The Stratus Air concierge had confirmed it via text. Her assistant, Aaliyah, had even double-checked the menu, ensuring her lobster bisque and steak medium rare would be ready for this flight. Not because Celeste was demanding, but because the ritual meant something to her. A black woman in tech earning her seat in a space not built for her. The meal was never about hunger. It was about visibility. Daniel Clean, the secondary attendant, stopped at row 2A with a warm towel and said, "For you, Mr. Clayton, always a pleasure." Celeste didn't get a towel. She didn't get eye contact. She didn't even get her name spoken. For the first time in years, she felt like an imposter in a room she built herself to enter. But Celeste didn't show it. Instead, she quietly opened her leather tablet case, a pristine device custom-built by Morgan Tech's own R&D lab, flashed awake. With a few swipes, she pulled up a live interface to her executive assistant. No words yet, just positioning. This wasn't rage. It was logging. She looked out the window. The Atlantic shimmered beneath soft clouds. But her thoughts were back in boardrooms, in auditoriums, in cold server labs where she had spent nights coding while her white colleagues got sleep and second chances. She remembered being the only one who didn't get invited to dinner after closing a $40 million deal. She remembered. The flight attendant's footsteps returned, but not for her. Another glass of wine for seat 1C. A polite joke for seat 1D. Laughter. Comfort. And her the only black woman in first class sitting with a cold sandwich meant for no one in particular. When the cabin light dimmed for meal service, Celeste still hadn't touched it. She placed the tray on the seat beside her with calculated calm. The seat monitor in front of her asked if she'd like to browse dessert options. She didn't. She turned off the screen. She didn't need distractions. She needed data. Her fingers tapped softly on her smartwatch. Query internal system log. Stratus Air. Flight 917. Passenger Celeste Morgan. Booking Diamond Plus. Meal Lobster Bisque Plus. Filet Mignon. Status confirmed. Timestamp 7 days prior. Confirmed. She took a breath and leaned back. Years ago, she might have confronted Becky. She might have demanded to see the head of crew, but that was before she learned how power really moves. You don't stop the machine by yelling at the gears. You reprogram the entire operating system. Across the aisle, a young male flight attendant greeted another passenger with a bright smile. "Would you like a second helping of foie gras?" "Mr. Malcolm." The white man in 2C nodded casually. Celeste watched the plate pass right in front of her. The same attendant never turned to her. Didn't ask. Didn't glance. The hum of the engine filled the silence left by every omission. This wasn't a mistake. This was design. And Celeste Morgan had built her entire career identifying flawed systems, then dismantling them without breaking a sweat. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just needed to wait. 10 more hours until Geneva. That was plenty of time for an audit. The tray still sat beside her untouched, unspoken for, unwelcome. Celeste Morgan hadn't moved, her spine straight, hands folded gently in her lap, eyes focused on the blank screen before her. But the stillness around her had started to shift. 3 rows behind, Helena Suarez adjusted her scarf and leaned slightly into the aisle, not out of nosiness, but instinct. Years in executive hospitality consulting had sharpened her senses, and this didn't smell like first-class service. It smelled like something rotten beneath polished silver. She'd seen the attendant, Becky, pass Celeste twice. Once to deliver a second glass of champagne to seat 1C, again to laugh quietly with 1D, but never once a glance back to 1A. That was intentional. Helena opened her notes app. She didn't need to write much, just keywords. Seat 1A, cold tray, no towel, no name spoken. For now, that was enough. Across the aisle, a young couple, Mia and Jordan, were mid-conversation. Mia, a travel micro-influencer, had her phone half raised to record the aesthetic cabin details. She wasn't hunting controversy, but she noticed the contrast the moment she zoomed in. Celeste in 1A with a sandwich, Radcliffe in 1C with caviar. The symmetry of injustice was cinematic. "She didn't eat," Mia whispered. "Maybe she's not hungry." Jordan shrugged. "No," Mia replied, her eyes narrowing. She was passed over. Mia turned off the camera, not out of fear, but because she didn't want to document gossip. She wanted to understand the story. At that same moment, Daniel Klein stood frozen at the beverage cart. He had overheard Becky's exact words earlier before takeoff. "Focus on the ones who tip." That one she tilted her head subtly toward Celeste won't even say thank you. Daniel had brushed it off, until now. Now he saw Celeste still, composed, surrounded by silence, and something about it made his stomach twist. He watched her eyes. Calm, cold, calculating. She wasn't ignoring the insult. She was studying it. And Daniel suddenly realized she wasn't the victim of poor service. She was the witness to a pattern. And she was recording it all, just not with a phone. Behind them, soft laughter continued from 2C. "We're lucky today." "Huh," Malcolm Clayton chuckled. "Caviar before takeoff. Service doesn't get better than this," Radcliffe said. Celeste didn't turn around, but she heard it all. So did Helena. So did Mia. And so did Daniel, who now felt the weight of that unspoken divide thicken in the air. Then, a moment subtle, but chilling. As Becky returned to 1A to collect the untouched tray, she didn't look Celeste in the eye. She simply said, "Finished as if a cold sandwich and a half glass of water were adequate for a VIP guest." Celeste turned her head slowly and replied, "Did I say I was finished?" Becky hesitated. The confidence in her gait faltered. I thought I pre-ordered a lobster bisque and prime steak 7 days ago," Celeste said, not raising her voice. What I received wasn't a meal. It was a message. Becky opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Her fingers tightened slightly on the tray, as if clenching control she no longer had. Then she turned and walked away. No apology. No explanation. Helena blinked. That exchange alone told her everything she needed. She pulled up the contact of a friend at the International Luxury Service Alliance and began typing. Subject observed disparity. Flight 917. Note VIP in 1A denied confirmed meal. Possible discrimination. Confirm service logs. Name Celeste Morgan. She hit send. Behind her. Mia had resumed recording, not publicly, but privately. "If you ever wondered how a system reveals itself," she whispered into the mic, "this is it. Frame by frame. And Celeste." She didn't flinch. She tapped her smartwatch once. New query, pull archived footage. Cabin crew interactions. Seats 1A through 2D. Start timestamp 0019. The plane cruised steady through the clouds. But inside, the cabin was tilting not in motion, but in narrative. Witnesses weren't just noticing. They were preparing. Celeste Morgan didn't look up when Becky passed by again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Two whispers now followed Becky's footsteps, soft. Uneasy murmurs that hovered like smoke just under the cabin lights. Helena Suarez had stopped taking quiet notes. Instead, she now watched Becky with the sharpened eyes of someone who'd spent 20 years dissecting luxury service standards and just seen them shattered. From her seat in row 3, Helena pressed a button. A flight attendant, not Becky, approached. "Can I speak to your cabin lead?" she asked quietly. The attendant blinked. "That would be Ms. Whitmore. Then I'd prefer to speak to someone else." The attendant hesitated, nodded, and stepped away. In seat 1A, Celeste adjusted the collar of her navy blazer. Her hands remained calm, but her mind was already 2 steps ahead. Her smartwatch pulsed gently against her wrist. Aaliyah's message blinked onto the screen. Background check on Whitmore underway. Preliminary hits. 2 guest complaints logged. Bias pattern index rising. Will confirm shortly. Celeste didn't smile. She didn't need to. Because what had started as an insult was now becoming architecture, each layer of silence a structural flaw in Stratus Air's culture. And she intended to bring the whole system under review. Meanwhile, Mia Thompson couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Hey," she said to her boyfriend Jordan, "look again." She flipped her camera to replay footage. Becky refilling glasses for 1C and 1D. All smiles and nods. then skipping 1A entirely. Jordan watched, his brows furrowed. She really didn't serve her. Nope, Mia said. And look, same meal trays for everyone but her. I thought maybe she had dietary stuff. She pre-ordered, Mia cut in. I heard her say it. 7 days ago. They didn't forget. They chose not to serve her. She paused. I'm uploading this. Mia. No names. No faces. Just the pattern. She posted the video to her 112,000 followers. Caption seat 1A. The only one without wine, hot food, or even eye contact. This isn't luxury. This is exclusion. Hashtags seat 1A luxury divides watch closely. By the time the plane crossed over Newfoundland airspace, the post had 14,000 views. And growing. Back in the front of the cabin. Daniel Clean's hand shook slightly as he poured a second glass of rosé for Mr. Clayton. Thanks. Daniel. You guys are doing great, Clayton said, oblivious. Daniel forced a nod, but his eyes flicked toward 1A, and guilt began to build like pressure behind his ribcage. He wanted to say something, but Becky was still nearby, and the unspoken hierarchy of flight crews was as unforgiving as any boardroom. He walked toward the galley, pulled out his phone, and opened a private crew channel. Text to colleague James off shift. Need to talk. Flight 917. Becky's targeting a Diamond Plus VIP. It's bad. James. Did she say anything direct, Daniel? No. But you know her tone, her pattern. Same as what happened to that Indian CEO last year. James didn't reply for 5 minutes. Then, be careful. She's protected. Daniel put the phone down and exhaled. Meanwhile, Helena was no longer content with note-taking. She flagged the junior attendant, Daniel's colleague, and asked, Are meals ever prioritized based on race or gender? The young man froze. Excuse me? Helena leaned in slightly. You heard me. Is it random that the only black woman in first class received a sandwich while everyone else enjoys full-course meals? He didn't answer, but she saw the truth flicker in his eyes. No need to respond, she said. I've logged the timestamp. This isn't just negligence. It's systemic. Elsewhere. Celeste scrolled through internal logs on her tablet. Aaliyah had sent another update crew member ID, STA035. Becky Whitmore prior complaints, X2, service performance flagged in 2023. Underneath that internal memo focus service on passengers who tip. Celeste forwarded the message to her secure corporate server. Then, without raising her voice, she pressed the crew call button. A soft ding echoed through the quiet. Daniel answered it. Yes, Miss Morgan. She looked him straight in the eye. I'd like to know which of your passengers was prioritized over me. I'm Diamond Plus. I confirmed my order a week ago. Why was I served economy food? Daniel went pale. I'm not sure. Then find someone who is, she said, voice low but decisive. Behind her, 3 passengers had turned to look. Helena, Mia, and a businessman who had remained silent until now, but was already composing a LinkedIn post titled, What I Saw on Flight 917. Should concern every business leader. The temperature in the cabin had dropped, but the stakes. They were rising by the minute. The cold sandwich was no longer just a meal. It was memory. It was history. It was every room Celeste Morgan had walked into and been questioned before she could speak. Every meeting where her credentials were second-guessed. Every boardroom pitch where she had to prove her presence wasn't a mistake. As Daniel backed away, promising to check with the galley, Celeste didn't look at him. Her gaze remained locked out the window, staring into the blue-black sky stretching over the Atlantic. Aaliyah's message had just come through internal flag raised. Confirmed same crew member served incorrect meals to 2 minority VIPs last year. No disciplinary action taken. Logged as training oversight. Celeste's mind didn't race. It clicked, methodically. This wasn't a pattern of incompetence. It was a system running exactly as designed. Her smartwatch vibrated again, pulling her thoughts back. But what really caught her wasn't the message. It was a sound, a whisper, from the row behind her. "She's the woman from the Forbes article, right, Morgan Tech?" "Yeah," someone responded. "She's the AI one. Global contracts, cybersecurity stuff." Celeste didn't turn, but she heard the shift. The recognition. The way her identity was being recalibrated in real time. She wasn't just some business class seat upgrade. She was Celeste Morgan. The same woman who once walked into Sterling Capital's glass tower at age 33 and was mistaken for the assistant. She remembered it vividly. That morning, her presentation had been loaded on her tablet, her suit pressed, her pitch airtight. But when she entered the boardroom, one of the men had looked up and said, "Can you grab us coffee before the meeting starts?" She hadn't gotten angry. She hadn't even blinked. She'd smiled and replied, "Of course, if you'll stay after and let me walk you through the $15 million security platform that just flagged 400 vulnerabilities in your hedge fund's infrastructure." The room had gone silent. 3 months later, they became her first enterprise client. But the stain, that invisible one, never quite washed out. Like the time at the London Tech Forum, when a panel moderator introduced her as the unexpected voice in innovation, or the moment at the MIT Gala when someone asked if she was part of the entertainment. These weren't accidents. They were quiet edits to her legitimacy, a slow erasure. And now, on Flight 917, it was happening again, except this time. It came with a tray of wilted lettuce and plastic cutlery. Her tablet buzzed again. Aaliyah had found something deeper. Uncovered internal crew note. Passenger in 1A often has princess attitude. Focus elsewhere. The note was dated 6 months ago. It wasn't even about her. But it could have been. Because in this system, Black women in first class were interchangeable. One strong voice became every difficult passenger. One leadership title became every presumed diva. Celeste looked up, eyes scanning the crew without emotion. She wasn't going to fight with words. She was going to mark the entire flight. Behind her, Helena tapped gently on the armrest, trying to recall the last time she had seen a situation this blatant. She remembered a hotel in Monaco, 2019. A black guest left waiting in the lobby while 3 white couples were checked in with flutes of Prosecco. Helena had logged a complaint then, but nothing had come of it. That memory now resurfaced like a bad taste. She reached into her bag and pulled out her Industry ID International Luxury Service Advisory Board. She snapped a photo of her seat number, logged the incident, and typed a title for her report: Selective Service Discrimination. Flight 917, VIP passenger observed. In row 3A. Mia watched as Celeste lifted her smartwatch again and scrolled through what looked like a secure admin dashboard. She couldn't see the details, but she could see the poise. "Jordan?" she whispered. "That woman's not just a passenger. She's what she's watching the whole system from inside, and I think she's about to burn it down." Celeste shifted in her seat, just slightly, and pulled up the live network feed from Stratus Air's crew interaction logs, public access, hidden behind a security wall that only someone like her could breach. thanks to her enterprise-level digital rights. Every name, every timestamp, every tray handed out, documented. It was all there. 6 white men served within a 4-minute window. Celeste 11 minutes later. 1 cold sandwich. She smiled not with triumph, with precision. She had everything she needed. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear the voice of that old Sterling Capital executive from 10 years ago. You'll never change the system from the outside. He was right, which is why she was always meant to sit in seat 1A. The turbulence didn't come from the wind. It came from the cabin. Not a word had been shouted, not a single voice raised. But something beneath the surface had shifted, and those attuned to tension could feel it. The quiet had become loaded, measured, and behind that quiet, movements were beginning to form. Celeste Morgan leaned back slightly in her seat as Daniel returned with a stuttered sentence. Ms. Morgan, I've spoken with the catering lead. They said it might have been a routing error. She raised a brow. Slowly. No need to elaborate, she said calmly. Just note that I've logged the interaction. Daniel paled. He nodded and stepped away, his hands almost shaking. He didn't know what she meant by logged, but something about the way she said it made him certain he'd just been added to a digital paper trail. He wasn't wrong. On Celeste's tablet, a recording of the interaction had already been time-stamped and archived to a secure Morgan Tech server. Aaliyah had access. So did the firm's legal counsel. Across the ocean in Manhattan. Aaliyah Grant had already picked up her second cup of coffee and was fully awake, fingers flying across her keyboard in near silent fury. The Morgan Tech Executive Suite had long developed internal tools for risk management. And right now, Aaliyah wasn't just tracking data. She was initiating Audit Protocol 7, an internal escalation reserved for cases involving discrimination against high-profile partners. The trigger. Not Celeste's report, not her message, but the pattern. 6 white male passengers, full meals served in under 5 minutes. 1 black female CEO, 11-minute delay, downgraded tray, no confirmation of name, no eye contact, and 0 corrective action by crew. The numbers spoke, and Morgan Tech was listening. Aaliyah clicked into the airline's back-end system through a legally permitted partnership gateway. Celeste was a board-level VIP customer, after all, and began combing through internal logs. She accessed real-time flight service logs, crew activity dashboards, AI-powered behavioral analytics from cabin cams. She didn't need to prove intent. She just needed to reveal the pattern, and it was already forming. Back on Flight 917, Helena Suarez sent her 3rd email, this time to the Vice President of Luxury Service Standards, her former colleague. Subject urgent, Stratus Flight 917. Discriminatory service behavior observed, documented, confirmed. Passenger Celeste Morgan. Suggest immediate inquiry to preserve brand trust. Below that, she attached a brief video, Becky's dismissal, the cold sandwich tray, and the reaction of surrounding passengers. In row 3, Mia clicked publish. Her clip was already gaining traction. A close-up of 1A, the ignored passenger, overlaid with a single caption. The seat that defines who gets to matter. 30 minutes later, the video had surpassed 75,000 views. Within 45, a prominent equity influencer retweeted it with the message, "This is not about food. This is about being seen." Seat 1. Celeste hadn't said a word in over 15 minutes. She didn't need to. Her silence had become a language the system understood, a language of restraint laced with implication. Daniel stood behind the beverage cart again, staring into the champagne tray like it might answer his confusion. He felt the pull of guilt, of discomfort, of fear. He knew what Becky had done. He'd seen it happen before, but never to someone who stared back like that. Never to someone who documented it all without raising her voice. He turned, walked to the front, and did something Becky never would have expected. He knocked on the crew supervisor door. "Hey," he said to the assistant chief of service, "there's a problem in row 1. With the guest with us." The supervisor blinked. "You okay?" "Daniel, no. But I want to be." In that moment, a thread had snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough for change to start leaking in from the seams. Celeste glanced at the cabin clock. 5 hours left until Geneva. 5 hours for a crew to figure out what kind of history they were making. Back in New York, Aaliyah had completed the first sweep of data. Behavioral Flag Index, 92.7%. Repeat pattern confirmation, yes initiate. Partner incident report, yes escalate to CEO level alert in progress. The last screen blinked green. She clicked send. A minute later, a vibration buzzed across Celeste's smartwatch. She opened the message. System alert accepted. CEO Charles Edmonds has been notified. Flight crew under live audit. Arrival team assembling. Celeste closed the screen and smiled. Not for revenge, but for precision. Because in this system, silent, polished, and too long unchallenged, it wasn't the scream that changed things. It was the quiet that moved with strategy. And now, the system itself was waking up. The hum of the engines remained steady, but the energy inside the first-class cabin had changed completely. Celeste Morgan didn't move, but her silence had become gravitational. People noticed her now, not for her fame, but for the chill around her. The kind of silence that meant a storm was forming behind the curtain of professionalism. And Becky Whitmore. She felt it. She couldn't explain why her steps felt heavier now. Why, as she refilled wine at 2D, her smile felt more forced. Why Daniel wouldn't meet her eyes. Why the woman in 1A hadn't spoken again, but also hadn't touched the tray. It still sat there, like evidence. Becky took a breath, tried to reset. Just another flight. One cold sandwich isn't a federal crime. But her hands betrayed her shaking slightly as she reached for a cloth napkin. In the rear galley, Daniel leaned against the wall, staring at his shoes. His message had been received. He'd reported the incident, logged it. He should have felt relieved. He didn't. Because for the first time in his 8 years of flying, he felt like a co-conspirator. Not because he acted, but because he didn't. He had watched Becky dismiss Celeste. He'd seen the tray. He'd heard the jokes. She's not like our usual Diamond members, and said nothing. And now it wasn't just guilt. It was exposure. Because when someone like Celeste Morgan pressed the call button, she wasn't just asking for service. She was pulling a string that led to the top. And that string was unraveling fast. 5 rows back. Helena Suarez had begun receiving replies. Her email to the Luxury Service Advisory Board flagged for internal discussion. Her message to the VP of Strata Standards auto-replied with, "Escalated to director level. Expect direct contact post-landing." She leaned back in her seat and crossed her legs. Good, she thought. It's about time someone important stopped pretending nothing happens in first class. And the irony wasn't lost on her. This wasn't about a downgrade to economy. It was about the illusion of equality in the one space designed to hide inequity under $200 champagne. In row 3A, Mia refreshed her TikTok post. Comments, 217 likes, 94,000 some word shares, 21,400. One comment floated to the top. Her name is Celeste Morgan. She doesn't need first class. She owns the jet figuratively and digitally. Another seat 1A is no longer a seat. It's a spotlight. Mia glanced up at the back of Celeste's seat. Still unmoved. Still upright. She felt a strange shiver. This wasn't just a flight. It was the moment a system cracked. And the crack was spreading. Becky tried to carry on, smiling, moving, pouring, but the responses had changed. Mr. Clayton didn't joke as much. Mr. Radcliffe was scrolling through his tablet, brows furrowed, reading something, a news headline, a video. She walked faster, just to move past it. But even that didn't help, because just before she reached the galley again, she saw him. Brandon Ellis, Regional Director of European Operations, boarding early from Geneva with a Stratus badge and no suitcase. He wasn't supposed to be here, and the second she saw his eyes sweep the cabin, she knew why he was. In the cockpit, a soft tone beeped the signal for incoming high-level ground instruction. The co-pilot confirmed it. We've been advised to prepare for priority deplaning for a VIP under review protocol. The captain nodded. Protocol Red Line 917. At Morgan Tech HQ, Aaliyah had already received the full integration report, the data from Celeste's tablet, crew camera behavior logs, and real-time analytics had all been verified. The system had flagged the incident as not only discriminatory, but structurally tolerated. The conclusions: breach of elite service ethics, Flight 917, code red. In the cabin, Celeste tapped a final command into her tablet. Prepare final report. Activate Geneva Gate handoff. Confirm legal observers present. She closed the cover. Becky, passing once more, caught the movement. Can I take your tray now? Ma'am, she asked, voice tight. Celeste didn't blink. No, she said softly. The tray stays, but it's finished. Celeste turned her head, her voice velvet-wrapped steel. I didn't touch it, and it was never mine to finish. Becky hesitated, then walked away quickly, her smile twitching at the edges. She didn't know that her last line had just become the center of a viral clip reposted on Twitter. Caption, I didn't touch it. And it was never mine to finish. Celeste Morgan, redefining power in silence. And as the video spread, so did the pressure. Inside the cabin, outside the airline, across boardrooms and inboxes. Becky had thought Celeste was just another difficult passenger. She didn't realize she had just become Exhibit A, and the judge was already watching from 42,000 feet. In most corporate scandals, change comes slowly through press releases, shareholder meetings, and carefully crafted apologies. But this wasn't most scandals. This was Celeste Morgan. And while the plane still cruised thousands of feet above the Atlantic, the first shockwaves of systemic collapse had already begun below discreet, digital, and devastatingly fast. At Morgan Tech's Crisis Protocol Center in Manhattan, Aaliyah Grant monitored a dashboard blinking red. The internal code for this situation was now upgraded from pattern bias to Tier 1 brand exposure. That meant one thing: the world was watching. Engage Stage 2, Aaliyah said into her secure headset. Moments later, a second Morgan Tech system, SpectraPulse, came online, designed to track public perception spikes in real time. The platform was now mapping thousands of data points. Keywords: Seat 1A, Celeste Morgan, Stratus Air Discrimination. Media hits 14 online articles, 6 news, blog mentions, 1 breaking alert from The Verge, TikTok and Twitter 1.2 million combined views, and climbing Aaliyah opened a secure call with Celeste's legal advisor, Nadia Price. Is she speaking publicly? Nadia asked. No. Aaliyah replied. She doesn't have to. The system's doing the talking now. And indeed, it was. In Geneva, at Stratus Air's European headquarters, a silent alarm had gone off in the public relations crisis room. A junior analyst had flagged a TikTok post that had crossed 1 million views in under 2 hours. The video, a cold sandwich tray, a woman in seat 1A, silent. A whispering voiceover. When you're too powerful to be ignored, but they try anyway. The analyst sent it up the chain with a note. Passenger is confirmed as Celeste Morgan. The VP of Communications stopped mid-sentence when the name appeared on her screen. God help us. She forwarded the alert directly to CEO Charles Edmonds. Back on the plane. Becky had started to unravel. Her hair, once tightly pinned, had begun to loosen. Her steps lost their grace. The usual spring in her service routine had vanished, replaced by cautious glances and 2 quick nods. She hadn't served Celeste again since the last exchange. She couldn't. Not because she wasn't assigned, but because the aisle itself now felt like a courtroom. Every movement, every tone, every glance recorded, scrutinized, passed around the globe at broadband speed. Meanwhile, in 3A, Mia opened Instagram. The seatbelt sign was still off, and she figured if she didn't post this now, someone else would. She uploaded a carousel. First photo Celeste looking out the window, backlit by cabin lights. Second, the untouched tray. Third, Becky walking past with a bottle of wine for someone else. Caption: when silence speaks louder than protest. When power doesn't shout, but shifts the room. I saw history today in seat 1A. Celeste Morgan, seat 1A, rebrand the sky. The post went viral in under 30 minutes in Geneva. PR analysts pulled up the data stream. Sentiment analysis graphs tanked in real time. Customer trust ratings fell 18 points in 90 minutes. They called an emergency summit. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, another storm brewed, this time among the crew. Daniel had spoken to the assistant lead, quietly, discreetly. But the conversation had spread like wildfire in the galley. Did you know who she was, Becky's toast? That lady's not playing games. They're sending an arrival team to meet the flight. HR, legal, compliance. One junior attendant whispered, "We're not just losing a customer. We're losing the whole foundation of how we operate." In seat 1A, Celeste wasn't speaking. She didn't need to. Her assistant had already compiled the formal audit request. Her lawyers had begun collecting previous case files of luxury service bias. Her digital forensics team had accessed metadata from the onboard cameras through a temporary compliance clause afforded to Diamond Plus members. Every video, every skipped eye contact, every meal tray timestamp. In the back of the plane, Becky tried to compose herself, breathing slowly, counting seconds. She hadn't done anything wrong. She kept telling herself, not on paper, not explicitly, but deep down, she knew. She knew what kind of service she offered to certain passengers. She knew how she prioritized names that were familiar, voices that were confident, skin tones that reassured her. She called it intuition. The company called it experience. But now, the world had another name for it: discrimination. Daniel passed her in the aisle and didn't say a word. She hated the silence more than confrontation. And as she turned the corner, she noticed something else. Seats 1C and 1D weren't smiling anymore. They were watching Celeste now, not dismissively, but warily, as if trying to measure what kind of woman could bring a multi-billion-dollar airline to its knees with nothing more than a gaze and a glitch in catering. Back at headquarters, Stratus Air's legal team had finished their internal summary draft, Title Service Culture Audit Request, initiated by VIP tier-level passenger CM. 2 clicks later, it was in Edmonds's inbox. He opened it, read the first paragraph, and leaned back in his chair. "This isn't a complaint," he muttered. His aide tilted her head. "Sir," he looked at her and said, "it's a rebrand, and we're not leading it anymore." The numbers were no longer buried in back-end systems. They were now front and center on tablets, dashboards, and inboxes across 3 continents. Evidence that the bias in seat 1A wasn't a one-time error. It was a documented pattern. And the woman sitting quietly with a cold sandwich beside her was the data analyst, the whistleblower, and the CEO all in one. At 37,000 feet. Celeste Morgan stared at the edge of her smartwatch display. The confirmation she'd been waiting for pulsed once, then displayed in sharp digital clarity, behavioral discrepancy report confirmed. 14 individual bias flags cross-verified across 28 flights. Target patterns race, gender, age, Becky Whitmore, 92.4% correlation. And underneath it, a blinking button. Export full report to legal. She tapped once. Across the ocean in Geneva. Stratus CEO Charles Edmonds sat with a tight jaw as his executive team finished presenting the initial impact briefing. The footage was pulled by Morgan Tech's forensic security arm. They're a compliance-level tech partner. We can't block the data, it's already been validated against our own AI oversight systems, said the director of operations, voice flat. Edmonds flipped to the second page of the printed report, cabin footage screenshots. Becky walking past 1A 4 times, other crew addressing each white male passenger by name. Timestamps showing Celeste waited more than 11 minutes for service, while others were served within 3. But the detail that made Edmonds go still came near the bottom of the page. Average smile duration and facial engagement toward white male VIPs, 3.8 seconds. Toward Celeste Morgan, 0.4 seconds. Median deviation, 89.5%. Their own cameras, their own AI, their own standards, weaponized by the very woman they dismissed. She's not documenting this to post on social media, the communications director said quietly. She's building a legal architecture, and they all knew what that meant. Back on Flight 917, Daniel Clean stared at the crew manifest on the back of the service wall. He had seen the report too. A junior attendant had shown it to him, whispering, "Scared." "It's bad," the attendant had said. They've traced 3 different events to Becky, including that Nigerian banker who filed a complaint last December. Daniel remembered it. At the time, it had been waved off. Guest misinterpretation, they'd said. No further action. But now the misinterpretations had become math, cross-verified, multi-flight, time-stamped math. He walked up the aisle again, but this time, not for service. He stopped by Celeste's seat. She didn't look up. "I just wanted to say." He hesitated. "I should have said something sooner." Celeste glanced at him, not with warmth, but with precision. Her look didn't seek comfort. It measured consequence. "Noted," she said simply. And Daniel understood. This wasn't the part where forgiveness was given. It was the part where accountability arrived. Meanwhile, in the passenger seats nearby, a shift was occurring. Mr. Radcliffe Seat 1C had pulled out his own phone, now reading an article on The Guardian titled, "A Cold Sandwich, a Systemic Collapse." How Seat 1A became the symbol of luxury's blind spot. The story was live. The quote from an anonymous crew member stung. "It wasn't a mistake. She was a regular. We just thought she wasn't the tipping type." Radcliffe set down his glass. Suddenly, the champagne had gone flat. Mia refreshed her feed. The Seat 1A tag was now trending across 4 platforms. Posts weren't just about Celeste. They were about others. A black mother who'd been skipped for in-flight wine. An Asian entrepreneur who'd been called Sir 3 times before someone realized she was the founder. A Latina professor who got a sandwich while her white co-panelists got steak. And beneath every story, the same comment. It started with a sandwich. It ended with a reckoning. Celeste opened her tablet once more. She didn't need drama. She needed accuracy. She accessed Stratus's crew compliance record, logged under her partner privileges as a Diamond Plus stakeholder. The internal data reflected real-time activity. Becky Whitmore active crew. Service pattern logged. Under live internal observation, a new line had appeared. Pending review. Behavior under ethical scrutiny. Confirmed alerts 3. Escalation level red tier. Celeste clicked one final button. Submit evidence log to Stratus Ethics Board. Timestamp 16:07 UTC. And with that, the decision left her hands and entered the system. By the time the plane began its slow descent toward Geneva, the entire Stratus executive tier had been summoned to an emergency ethics call. No one knew what Celeste Morgan would say after the wheels touched down. But it didn't matter anymore, because her data had already spoken. The landing gear locked into place with a distant thump. Celeste Morgan sat perfectly still in Seat 1A as the plane began its slow, practiced descent toward Geneva International. Outside, the clouds parted over the Swiss Alps, but inside the aircraft, a fog of unease had settled. This wasn't just another landing. It was a reckoning coming to ground level. In the cockpit, the captain received a priority clearance flight 917, granted gate 7. VIP protocol active. Crew, stand by for immediate deplaning instructions. VIP protocol wasn't unusual, but the tone of urgency was. So was the note appended to it. Arrival team legal affairs. HR division. Regional CEO in attendance. In the galley. Becky felt it before she understood it. The quiet stares. The sudden radio silence on internal crew comms. The way Daniel, usually deferential, stood beside the beverage cart with his arms crossed, not saying a word, not helping, not covering. Her stomach twisted. She walked back toward her post, but stopped abruptly when she caught sight of the tablet screen in the hands of a passenger in 3B. Her face, frozen in a video frame, holding a tray. Her mouth mid-sneer, captioned with a quote she never remembered saying aloud. She's not the tipping type. Becky's pulse spiked. A cold sheen of sweat spread down her spine. She turned away, gripping the galley edge. She had handled difficult passengers before, but this wasn't just a complaint. This was a public autopsy of her behavior. And worse, it was being delivered with surgical precision. Seat 1A was still silent. Celeste hadn't moved. Her tablet was off. Her eyes calm, but everyone around her, flight attendants, passengers, even the pilots had begun to adjust themselves around her silence like it was gravity. No one asked her if she needed anything now. No one dared. In the business class cabin, A murmur rippled through the rows as the pilot made a rare announcement in person. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with Stratus Air. We'll be arriving shortly. Please remain seated upon landing. There will be a temporary hold on disembarkation due to special clearance procedures." Special clearance. Everyone heard it. No one missed who it was for. On the tarmac, a black sedan with tinted windows waited beside Gate 7. Two figures in dark navy suits stood outside it. One wore a Stratus Airlines lapel pin, Brandon Ellis, regional CEO for European operations. The other wore a Geneva Legal Division badge clipped to her breast pocket. She held a thick manila folder marked Flight 917, Internal Review Dossier. The wheels touched down. As the tires screamed briefly against the runway, the plane jolted with deceleration, and with it came an invisible shift. For some, it was panic. For others, dread. For Celeste, it was timing. She unbuckled her seatbelt only after the aircraft had come to a full stop. Slowly, deliberately. The gesture wasn't dramatic, but it was authoritative. Passengers remained seated. No one moved. The cabin crew made no eye contact. A faint ding signaled the opening of the cabin door. Becky looked up instinctively and stopped breathing, because standing at the jet bridge threshold was not the usual welcome crew. There were no polite smiles. No thank you for flying with us. There were auditors, compliance officers, a camera mounted to a tablet, and a woman with a clipboard whose eyes landed directly on her. Daniel turned to Becky, quietly, firmly. "They're not here for us," he said. "They're here because of us." In the silence that followed, Celeste rose from her seat. She adjusted her blazer, lifted her leather bag over one shoulder, and stepped into the aisle with a composure that didn't demand space. It created it. The lead auditor stepped forward. "Miss Morgan," she said, bowing her head. "Welcome to Geneva." Celeste didn't stop. She didn't acknowledge the greeting. Her voice, when it came, was steady, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "No need to welcome me. Just prepare the room." She walked past the doorway. Brandon Ellis followed, silently. The auditor's team stepped inside, and then came the moment Becky hadn't prepared for. Her name was spoken aloud. "Rebecca Ann Whitmore. Please remain on board." The remaining crew turned. Eyes flickered. Becky stood frozen. She didn't ask why. She already knew. The moment had tipped. Not because someone screamed. Not because someone posted. But because someone documented everything and then walked off the plane without a single wasted word. In corporate disasters, turbulence doesn't begin in the sky. It starts in conference rooms, behind frosted glass and locked screens. But on this day, Stratus Air's turbulence wasn't metaphorical. It was measurable. It had a pulse, a timestamp, and a name, Celeste Morgan. Back in Geneva, even before the last passenger from Flight 917 had disembarked, the pressure inside Stratus Air headquarters was mounting. The leadership floor was under lockdown, not from a threat, but from an audit. On the 18th floor, a red light blinked on a secure terminal incident flag, Tier 1 cultural breach. Source Flight 917. ETA of principal arrived. CEO Charles Edmonds sat motionless, reading the internal findings as if the paper itself could delay the consequences. The report read like a confession. Disparity in service time between white male VIPs and Celeste Morgan, 472%. Crew member Becky Whitmore flagged for pattern bias across 6 international flights. Passenger confirmation logs tampered timestamp on pre-ordered premium meal. Preliminary employee interviews reveal institutionalized profiling shorthand for non-white VIPs, and beneath it, a chilling summary. Institutional bias not only present, but structurally tolerated. That sentence would haunt Stratus's reputation for decades if it leaked. And it was about to. In the departure lounge, Celeste Morgan was led into a private conference suite prepared hastily by the airline's European executive team. Fresh flowers on the table, bottled water imported from France, handwritten welcome card on the table. She ignored them all. Her presence alone had already silenced the room. Her blazer was wrinkle-free. Her voice unused but weaponized through the weight of her digital audit. She placed her phone on the table and slid it across to Brandon Ellis without a word. On screen was a compiled package, time-stamped video footage of service bias, cabin crew response pattern overlays, tone analysis from internal crew cam audio, Stratus's own training protocol violations. Highlighted in red, Brandon swallowed hard. He had never seen data used this way. This wasn't a complaint. It was a case. Back inside the plane. Still parked at Gate 7, Becky Whitmore sat stiffly in Seat 2C, hands clasped, lips drawn pale. Two HR officials sat across from her in fold-out jump seats. One held an iPad loaded with interview prompts. The other had a printed transcript of crew communications and meal orders. Becky broke the silence first. I didn't say anything racist. The HR rep didn't flinch. No one's claiming you did. Then why am I being treated like this? I've served thousands of flights. The rep looked up, calm, direct, because this is about behavior patterns, about who gets seen, who gets offered refills, who gets called by name, who waits 11 minutes for food in Seat 1A. Becky's shoulders sagged. I didn't mean to. That's the problem. You didn't need to mean it for it to hurt. Meanwhile, inside the Geneva conference room, Celeste finally spoke. We don't need a press statement. I don't need your apology. Her voice was low, steady. It didn't rise, it dropped, like a weight. What I need, she continued, is a systemic change, not symbolic, not surface level. I want every flight attendant retrained. I want AI systems in your planes to flag inequality in real time. I want cultural bias audits every 6 months, published to shareholders. And I want your board to understand this. She leaned forward, just slightly. This wasn't turbulence. She slid another document across the table. This was design. Back at Morgan Tech HQ, Aaliyah sent the final report to Stratus's crisis inbox, CCing 3 government aviation compliance officers and the Office for Workplace Discrimination Oversight. The subject line read, Formal Submission Flight, Satizens, Bias Event Systemic Culture Breach, Documented, Verified, Action Required. Minutes later, international aviation regulators flagged Stratus for a Level 3 compliance investigation, the highest possible alert before sanctions. Back in the cabin, Daniel Clean stood by the door, waiting for final crew clearance. The legal team approached. Mr. Clean, you are not under disciplinary review, one said. However, you're being placed under observation for failure to intervene. He nodded. No protest, just a quiet. Understood, because by now, he knew silence had a cost. On the tarmac, journalists had started to gather near the private terminal. Someone had leaked a snippet of the footage, the title of the emerging headline. Seat 1A when power doesn't need to speak but still brings a system down. And the world, watching from screens and lounges and timelines, didn't need a statement from Celeste Morgan, because the turbulence wasn't just in the air, it was in the system itself. And now, the altitude of silence had dropped. Fast. It started with a knock. Not the knock of confrontation, but the quiet kind that comes when someone inside finally decides they've had enough. Inside the Geneva crew lounge, hours after Flight 917 had landed and the doors had closed behind Celeste Morgan, the remaining flight attendants sat in a circle of forced calm, fresh uniforms, neutral expressions, but beneath the surface tension. Then came the knock, and in walked Clara Sloan, 15-year veteran regional crew trainer, one of the most respected names in the Stratus Senior Cabin Division. She didn't speak right away. She held a leather-bound clipboard in one hand and an old silver fountain pen in the other. When she looked at the crew, her gaze wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't forgiving either. "Close the door," she said to the operations manager beside her. The door shut. Then Clara turned and looked at Becky Whitmore. "I trained you," she said flatly. Becky nodded slowly, uncertain. "Yes, ma'am. In Vienna. 3 years ago." Clara flipped open the clipboard. "There are 3 logged complaints connected to your service behavior, 2 formally dismissed, 1 labeled unconfirmed inconsistency. I personally overrode the 3rd. That was my mistake." Becky stiffened. "They weren't racism. You know that." "I know you learned how to smile without making people feel welcome," Clara replied. "And I know exactly who you thought wouldn't notice." Becky looked down. No defense came. Clara turned her eyes toward Daniel. "You filed a partial report mid-flight, didn't you?" Daniel gave a slow nod. "Yes." "Why partial?" He swallowed. "Because I was afraid." Clara didn't soften. "And because you've been flying next to Becky for 5 years, and every time she passed over a passenger who didn't fit, you said nothing." Daniel winced. Silence held the room hostage. Then Clara walked to the front of the lounge and placed her clipboard down. It wasn't empty. Inside it were 2 documents, an internal crew testimony submission form, and a resignation letter. She turned to them and said something no one expected. "You have 24 hours. Daniel blinked. "To do what?" "To decide who you are. The moment Stratus hits the press with their action plan, they'll want blood, names, patterns, videos. If you speak now, you become part of the change. If you stay silent, you become part of the evidence." She pointed at the forms. "This is not about loyalty to your team. This is about loyalty to truth." And then, for the first time, Becky's voice broke. "I didn't mean to be biased. I was working by instinct." Clara's expression didn't move. "That's the problem. Rebecca, you were working from a world that taught you instinct equals whiteness." Another pause. Another silence. And then it happened. A younger crew member, Emilia from Lisbon, quietly stepped forward. She was new, just 8 months in. Always quiet, always obedient. But now, her voice came firm. "I saw it too. On Flight 804, a black executive woman asked Becky twice for a wine refill. She was ignored. We served 1D twice before she even got water." Becky's eyes widened. "That wasn't even related, I remember her face," Emilia said. She looked just like Celeste Morgan. Quiet, like she'd seen it all before. Clara looked at Emilia with something like approval. Then she looked back to the others. "You can stay afraid, or you can speak." She walked out. The door shut. Behind it, silence grew into something heavier responsibility. Meanwhile, across Geneva, in a boardroom lined with glass, CEO Charles Edmonds was addressing a dozen executives and legal advisors. He'd just finished reviewing Celeste's compiled evidence packet. He tapped the desk once. "Two options," he said. "We sacrifice 3 crew and claim isolated misconduct, or we do what no airline has dared to do." His general counsel raised an eyebrow, which is publicly admit that our premium service culture is built on an invisible filter, one that decides who looks like they belong in luxury and who looks like an intruder. Silence. Tense. Tight. Then Edmonds turned the screen. On it, the viral video, Celeste's untouched tray, Becky's blank face, and the line heard around the world, "I didn't touch it," and it was never mine to finish. The room exhaled as one. "We go with the second option," Edmonds said, "but only if we're brave enough to let the people who stayed silent finally speak." He looked out over the Geneva skyline. "This isn't a crisis," he said. "It's a choice." Stratus Air had always operated like a cathedral of control, gleaming surfaces, immaculate scripts, a devotion to discretion. But on the morning following Flight 917's landing, that pristine architecture began to fracture. The old guard, the stewards of legacy, silence, and subtle exclusion were about to fall. It began with a leak. A former crew member, no longer with the company, but still wired into the internal WhatsApp channels, posted anonymously to an industry watchdog blog. This isn't an isolated case. We used to joke that 1A only mattered if he wore cufflinks. We weren't trained for equity. We were trained for Polish. The post went viral in under an hour. By mid-morning, screenshots of internal Stratus crew training slides surfaced on Reddit, phrases like "prioritize familiar surnames," "use discretion for non-frequent VIPs," and worst of all, "avoid over-engagement with high-maintenance profiles. Tread lightly." One slide included a red circle annotation around a mock passenger name, Celeste M., flagged and titled, "The subreddit moderators didn't take it down. They pinned it." Across the Atlantic, in the U.S. Office of Stratus Corporate Communications, the phones were melting. CNN is requesting comment. The New York Times wants confirmation of crew suspensions. Vice just called it a champagne curtain scandal inside the Geneva HQ. Charles Edmonds paced the floor of the boardroom, tablet in hand, face grim. The document he held now wasn't just Celeste Morgan's audit. It was a resignation letter from one of their longest-standing vice presidents, Gordon Rothschild, Senior VP of in-flight experience, who had spent the past 15 years building Stratus's luxury culture. The letter was short. "I can no longer defend a system whose elegance is rooted in selective invisibility. I leave with deep regret and deeper shame." That same morning, Celeste Morgan sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Geneva hotel suite, legs crossed, watching the city awaken. She didn't need to log into SpectraPulse. She already knew. Aliyah had texted the summary collapse phase initiated, internal leadership fractures, VP Rothschild gone, 2 legacy board members under review, press projecting shareholder dip by 8.7%. Celeste placed her phone down without responding. Then, slowly, she stood and walked to the desk where a document sat unsigned. It was the formal offer, strategic advisor to the Global Service Culture Reform Program, Stratus's boldest internal overhaul in company history. Her name at the top, her terms embedded, her silence beneath every clause. She didn't sign it. Not yet. Not until the structure truly broke. Back at Stratus HQ, the tension boiled over during a closed-door executive meeting. Marcus DeLeon, head of Global Brand Partnerships, slammed his folder shut. "You're all acting like this is a media scare. It's not. It's exposure." Celeste Morgan walked into 1A and dismantled the whole facade with one cold tray. Across the table, Mariette Lang, former director of Elite Passenger Experience, folded her arms. "We built this brand on refinement. Now you want us to rip out decades of client loyalty because one woman didn't get her bisque." Heads turned sharply. Charles Edmonds didn't. He simply said, "You just defined the problem. Mariette." He turned the screen toward her. It showed the final line of Celeste's audit report. "When refinement excuses exclusion, you've confused etiquette with erasure." He let the silence sit. Let everyone absorb it. Then he added, "You're relieved of duty effective immediately." Mariette didn't speak. She stood, grabbed her notepad, and left the room. No one stopped her. The collapse had officially begun. Across departments, junior staff were whispering, some emboldened, others afraid. A handful filed internal statements echoing Amelia's courage. Others booked quiet appointments with HR. But the tide had shifted. The quiet alliance of protection, the culture of not saying anything, was now a liability. That afternoon, internal HR rolled out a new form labeled Witness to Bias, Legacy Culture, Incident Anonymous option enabled, Real-time review required. In 4 hours. 37 submissions flooded in. Celeste finally received the alert she'd been waiting for. Stratus announces formal dissolution of legacy crew ranking structure. All senior flight supervisors subject to retraining and reassessment. Another ping. All prior service prioritization protocols suspended indefinitely. And then the final one. Official apology to be issued within 24 hours. Drafted in collaboration with Celeste Morgan. She didn't smile. She simply turned to the desk again and picked up the pen. One name. One signature. Not to accept their apology, but to begin their education. The press conference wasn't grand. There was no stage, no velvet ropes, no curated backdrop of airline logos repeated in tidy rows. Just a simple podium at the Geneva Ethics Center, a single microphone, and a room filled with a new kind of silence, one that didn't suppress voices, but made space for accountability. Stratus Air's CEO, Charles Edmonds, stepped up to the microphone. No smile, no PR spin, just a stack of papers and a gaze steadier than his board had seen in years. "This isn't an apology tour," he began. "A beat? It's a reconstruction." Reporters stirred. Over the past 72 hours, we've received overwhelming evidence that parts of our elite service model were not just flawed, they were discriminatory by design. This failure wasn't accidental. It wasn't invisible. It was simply ignored. The lights of cameras blinked. Edmonds continued, his voice even. "From this moment forward, the system that allowed bias to masquerade as discretion is being dismantled. The policies you've seen leaked, those will not be denied. They will be buried. Behind the cameras." Celeste Morgan watched from the second row. No entourage, no notepad, just presence. Presence that now had an institution reconfiguring itself around her silence. Edmonds turned a page. "We have begun the termination and retraining of key personnel. We are initiating an industry-first equity audit across all elite service functions. And we are honored, actually, to announce a partnership with a new advisor, a person who, without raising her voice, raised a mirror to our industry." He looked out over the crowd. Celeste Morgan has agreed to serve as strategic advisor for service equity and cultural reform. The room murmured, then quieted again. In that pause, Celeste stood. She didn't walk to the microphone. She didn't wave. She simply nodded once. It was enough. Later that evening, in a quiet corner suite overlooking Lake Geneva, Celeste sat at a glass table reviewing the first phase of the reform blueprint. She had rewritten it herself, line by line. Gone were vague goals and performative promises. In their place, mandatory behavioral analysis training for all flight staff, audited quarterly by independent agencies, anonymous passenger equity scoring after each elite flight, a new AI-integrated monitoring system to flag service disparities in real time developed in collaboration with Morgan Tech. The disbanding of the loyalty-first prioritization model, replaced by a standard rooted in fairness and transparency. The document was called Project 1A. She closed the file and looked out the window. Below, a new generation of flight attendants was already arriving at the Geneva Training Center. Recruits from Kenya, Brazil, the Philippines, Mississippi, Detroit, diverse, bright-eyed, ready. One of them, a young woman with tight coils pinned neatly under a service cap, caught Celeste's gaze from across the glass lobby. She froze when she recognized her. Celeste raised a hand. Not a wave, just acknowledgement. The girl lit up like a lamp. In the U.S., change echoed fast. Major airlines issued rushed internal memos announcing equity reviews. Some scrambled to find their own Celestes. Others canceled public-facing ads featuring diverse crews while quietly firing mid-tier staff caught up in old patterns. But the headlines didn't care. Seat 1A forces industry-wide reckoning. Forbes Celeste Morgan. Did more with a sandwich than we've done in a decade. Fast Company, when power whispered, the system screamed. The Atlantic. At Stratus Air, the culture shift didn't come easy. Some resisted, some resigned, and some the quiet heroes rose. Daniel Clean, once too afraid to act, now led a peer-led training session titled When We See It, We Speak. Amelia, the junior attendant who once whispered the truth in the lounge, had been promoted to diversity officer for crew services. Becky Whitmore. Her contract was terminated after the internal review confirmed years of bias reinforced by silence, microaggressions, and preferential behavior. No public statement was issued. No spin. Just a simple HR line service incompatible with revised ethical standards. 3 weeks after the press conference, Celeste sat in a private roundtable with 11 executives from across the luxury airline industry. The room was different now. No one mistook her for the assistant. No one asked her if she was with the tech team. They all knew. She was the reason they were here. One of the executives, older, gray-haired, leaned forward and asked, "What made you stay silent for so long on that flight?" Celeste looked at him, her voice cool. "I wasn't silent," she replied. "I was building your new operating manual. Every system, no matter how shaken, has defenders." And as Project 1A began taking root inside Stratus Air, those defenders, the remnants of the old guard, began to stir. Not with loud protests or media backlash, but with whispers. It started as quiet muttering in the staff lounges. "They're overcorrecting. This isn't service anymore. It's surveillance." Why are we being punished for one woman's personal issue? Among crew veterans, particularly those who had flown under the legacy model for over a decade, a wave of passive resistance formed, subtle but growing. Reports surfaced of small delays in equity training attendance. Flight attendants feigned technical glitches when logging their behavior compliance checklists. One senior trainer allegedly told his team, "Just smile, nod, and pass the quiz. It'll blow over in 6 months." But what they didn't realize was this. The system had already changed. It had eyes now. At Morgan Tech's headquarters, the AI-backed ethics monitor nicknamed Concord flagged anomalies faster than human eyes ever could. Response times, vocal tone analyses, micro-expression mapping all cross-checked in real time with service equality standards. The monitors weren't there to punish. They were there to prevent erasure. So, when 3 first-class passengers, 2 black men and an Indian woman, reported nearly identical instances of being politely passed over for in-flight amenities within a single 72-hour window, Concord lit up in crimson. Each incident originated from a flight operated by a crew led by Richard Pike, a tenured in-flight manager with 21 years at Stratus. The same Richard who had once trained Becky Whitmore. When notified of the investigation, his reply was cold. Another witch hunt. He refused to cooperate. Then, a leaked email emerged from a private crew message board written by Pike himself. They want us to treat everyone equally, but let's be honest. 1A doesn't look the same for everybody. The fallout was immediate. Charles Edmonds summoned the Emergency Ethics Committee. The board reviewed the transcript. They had a choice: let Pike retire quietly or make an example. Celeste's response tipped the scale. She submitted no statement. Just a single sentence in an internal memo: equity fails when we protect the nostalgic instead of the necessary. Within hours, Pike was suspended pending full investigation. A press release followed. Stratus Air remains committed to zero tolerance on all forms of service-based discrimination, passive or active. Our commitment to equity is not seasonal, it's structural. But the resistance wasn't just internal. A whisper campaign had begun spreading externally, mostly among anonymous blogs, niche forums, and legacy hospitality circles. A Medium post, shared under a pseudonym, accused Project 1A of corporate activism theater, claiming it was punishing tradition in favor of performative wokeness. The article gained traction, especially among conservative travel influencers. One wrote, "First class is about comfort and recognition. Now you're told it's about watching your tone and being scared of passengers who might be tech billionaires in disguise." Another tweeted airlines should fly, not preach. But the pushback ran into a force stronger than opinion results. By the 4th week of implementation, Stratus reported a 19% rise in passenger satisfaction among non-white VIPs, a 27% reduction in behavioral complaints, a 41% increase in employee self-reporting on bias incidents. The media took note. The Wall Street Journal headlined, "Silent Reform: How Stratus Used AI, Audit, and One Woman's Poise to Rewrite Service Culture." Still, the resistance clung to its final stronghold, the shareholder floor. At the quarterly board meeting, one legacy investor stood and asked, "What will this cost us in elite retention?" You think the old money crowd wants a social experiment at 40,000 feet? Silence fell, until Celeste Morgan, invited as part of her advisory role, responded without a pause. "No," she said, "they don't want a social experiment. They want status." She stood, not to raise her voice, but to end the debate. And when status depends on exclusion, it becomes insecurity disguised as elegance. We're not tearing down prestige, we're redefining who's allowed to access it. Then she looked directly at the investor. If your clients believe their comfort depends on someone else's invisibility, then you don't need a new airline. You need a mirror. The room stayed still. Charles Edmonds tapped his hand on the table once. Firm. The board endorses Project 1A. Full continuation. No exceptions. Celeste sat back down, the fire in her eyes extinguished by resolution, and somewhere far above them, on a flight bound for Tokyo, a black mother traveling with her teenage daughter was just handed a glass of champagne in seat 1A. No delay, no suspicion, just respect. Stratus Air believed the storm had passed. With Project 1A firmly underway, internal compliance ticking upward, and Celeste Morgan now formally listed as their strategic cultural advisor, the narrative appeared to be turning in their favor. But as any strategist knows, progress always threatens those who benefit from the shadows, and the shadows had begun to organize. Within a private network of legacy airline executives, retired board members, elite hospitality consultants, and former directors quietly ousted during Celeste's reforms, a new conversation unfolded. A PDF file circulated quietly among them. Its title, "The Cost of Equity is Project 1A Alienating Premium Loyalty." It was professionally formatted, filled with cherry-picked statistics, anonymous passenger complaints, and thinly veiled criticisms. Quotes like, "I now feel like a suspect, not a guest. Crew are so afraid of being accused. They forget to make us feel special." The document implied that Project 1A wasn't reform. It was retribution. And that Celeste Morgan wasn't a partner in change, she was a threat to tradition. The file was anonymous, but Celeste recognized its tone. This wasn't open opposition. This was the beginning of a counterstrike, one meant to isolate her, undermine her influence, and turn the court of elite opinion against her. The timing wasn't accidental. 1 week from that moment, Celeste would present Project 1A's 6-week data review at the International Aviation Leadership Forum in London, a stage that would elevate her reform model to global industry standard. They wanted to fracture her before she got there. She didn't panic. She planned. At Morgan Tech HQ, she summoned her executive team, including Aaliyah Grant, 2 cybersecurity leads, a litigation advisor, and the project manager for SpectraPulse. Her first words: "They're not attacking the data. They're attacking the story." Aaliyah nodded. "Then we control the narrative." Celeste turned to the SpectraPulse engineer. "I want every instance of that PDF indexed. Find the source node. Don't engage. Just observe." The engineer frowned. "Even if it's embedded in secure back channels, Celeste." Especially then. Within 48 hours, the network trail was mapped. The PDF had originated not from an outside critic, but from within. A legacy-aligned executive, still sitting in Stratus's European Advisory Division, had drafted and circulated it. His name, Lars Whitmore, Becky's uncle. Celeste didn't blink. She turned to Aaliyah and said, "Schedule an internal ethics review." And the report Aaliyah asked, "Celeste, publish it, unedited, on Stratus's investor portal." Aaliyah stared. "You want to expose it?" "Yes," Celeste said, "because they just proved our point. The resistance isn't about operations, it's about entitlement. Let the investors see it." The next morning, headlines struck back like lightning. Whitmore family tied to Stratus backlash. Memo: The Guardian reform under siege. How old money fights new standards at 40,000 feet. The Financial Times from sandwich to scandal seat. A isn't done yet. CNN International. The memo, intended to discredit Celeste, had become a weapon for transparency. Stratus's public response was immediate and surgical. Charles Edmonds issued a company-wide statement acknowledging the document, condemning its intent, and confirming the immediate removal of Lars Whitmore from all advisory roles. But Celeste had something better than condemnation. She had data. At the London Forum, she took the stage not with a defense, but with undeniable evidence. Her slides were minimalist. Her tone, calm, but her message irrefutable. Passenger satisfaction among minority VIPs, plus 31%. Crew reported confidence in equity protocols, plus 44%. Repeat incidents of meal or service exclusion down 83%. Customer loyalty retention from new markets, plus 26%. Flight attendant turnover in non-discriminatory teams reduced by half. But her final slide was the one that silenced the room. It showed a bar chart. 2 lines. Trust before. Seat 1A. Trust after. She looked out over the crowd airline CEOs, compliance directors, and global media and said, "You tried to preserve tradition. I'm here to preserve dignity." Applause came first in a ripple, then a wave. She stepped down from the stage and was met not by cameras or questions, but by the president of another luxury airline who leaned in and whispered, "Would you help us build our version of Project 1A Celeste?" Nodded once, gladly. In Geneva. As news of the speech hit, a final email circulated quietly to all Stratus Air staff. Subject: New Protocol Update. Effective immediately. Body any retaliation direct or indirect against the equity program, its staff, or advisors will be treated as grounds for immediate termination. It was signed by Charles Edmonds and co-signed by Celeste Morgan. And just like that, the counterstrike collapsed. Not with drama, not with threats, but with facts, with structure, with silence that could not be denied. The Geneva tarmac looked the same. Same lights blinking in the soft gray dawn. Same ground crew moving with headsets and hand signals. Same staircase rolling up to the same aircraft door. But inside the aircraft, and inside the system that once protected polite discrimination behind crystal glass and perfect posture, everything had changed, because truth had landed, and it brought a camera crew. For the first time in Stratus Air's history, a live press walkthrough was approved for Flight 917's returning route. The airline called it transparency in motion. Celeste Morgan called it necessary. Passengers on board weren't celebrities or influencers. They were regular business travelers, entrepreneurs, doctors. An elderly black couple celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary in Seat 1A and 1B. When the doors opened, the journalists didn't rush. They observed. The lead crew member, Daniel Clean, stood at the front, not for spotlight, but for accountability. He greeted every passenger by name, regardless of accent, skin tone, or luggage brand. Behind him stood Amelia, now a senior flight trainer at just 26. As the elderly couple disembarked, Amelia offered a gentle smile. "Thank you for flying with us. It was an honor." The woman paused and touched Amelia's hand. "You saw us," she whispered. "You really saw us." Across the terminal, Stratus's internal media team streamed the arrival in real time. Not the glamour, the gestures. The subtle affirmations that equity didn't need a spotlight, it just needed consistency. And as viewers around the world watched Seat 1A no longer be a battleground, but a seat like any other, something irreversible occurred. Normalization. No longer a spectacle, no longer a moment of protest, but the new standard, back in the control room. Charles Edmonds stood beside Celeste Morgan, eyes fixed on the monitor. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think change required burning down the house." Celeste didn't look at him. Her gaze remained steady. "No," she replied. "You just needed to open the front door and let the truth walk in." Behind them, a PR officer rushed in. "We've just received a message from the Department of Transportation. They're inviting us to co-author the new luxury air service ethics framework." Charles turned to Celeste. "They want your name on the draft." She nodded. "Give them mine. And tell them this isn't about protecting airlines. It's about protecting people." At that very moment, the final internal report from Flight 917's audit went live, published in full on Stratus's corporate transparency portal. The report didn't bury the past. It displayed it. The original crew logs, the meal order tampering timestamps, the full footage with audio analysis, the passenger testimonies, the AI-generated bias heat maps. It ended with one line. The system failed not because it was broken. It failed because it worked exactly as it was designed to. We're redesigning it now. Signed, Celeste Morgan. Charles Edmonds Board of Cultural Oversight, Stratus Air within hours. The report had been downloaded 17,000 times. University ethics departments began teaching it. DEI programs cited it as a model. Lawyers called it the gold standard of proactive accountability. But perhaps the most important reader was a 19-year-old named Nina Taylor, watching from her phone in Atlanta International Airport. She wasn't flying first class. She wasn't flying for business. She was flying to a university she never thought she'd get into, one where she'd study computer science and aviation safety. And as she read the last page of the report, she whispered to herself, "I won't have to explain myself anymore." Back in Geneva, as Celeste stepped outside for air, a young journalist caught up with her. "Miss Morgan," she said, out of breath, "what do you say to those who think this all started because of one cold sandwich?" Celeste turned, smiled faintly, and said, "That sandwich didn't start it. It exposed it. What started this was years of quiet, endured by millions. I was just the one who didn't blink when the system expected me to look away." Then she walked across the tarmac, past reporters, past staff, past legacy toward the future, not as a victim, not even as a reformer, but as a mirror, and the world was finally ready to see itself. The ripples didn't stop at the runway, from Geneva to New York, from Johannesburg to Dubai. A quiet but determined recalibration was underway. Airlines that once watched Stratus Air from a safe distance were now calling emergency summits, not to avoid the fallout, but to understand the blueprint. Celeste Morgan had made something rare in the world of luxury service, irreversible precedent. It wasn't just that she'd exposed systemic exclusion with a single ignored meal. It was how she'd responded without scandal, without rage, and without retreat. She'd made dignity the strategy, and the industry had run out of excuses. At the newly established Stratus Center for Cultural Excellence, an institute jointly created by Celeste and Charles Edmonds, training simulations had replaced legacy hospitality modules. Gone were the scripts that taught subtle discretion or adjusted attention levels based on frequent flyer tier. In their place, real-world role-play, dynamic bias detection, AI-guided feedback loops that flag disparities in voice tone, reaction time, and recognition protocol. One class watched and studied actual footage from Flight 917, not as an indictment, but as instruction. A trainee raised her hand. Why didn't Miss Morgan ever raise her voice? Not once. The instructor, none other than Amelia, smiled gently, because she wasn't there to demand her place. She already owned it. The rest of us had to catch up. Meanwhile, across the luxury travel sector, tangible shifts began to appear. Air Vera, a Gulf carrier known for its gold-trimmed first class, publicly committed to replicating Project 1A. Their CEO quoted Celeste directly. "Prestige means nothing if it depends on someone else's erasure." GlobalJet adopted a new internal policy. Every incident of delayed or altered service to a VIP passenger would be logged no matter how minor and reviewed by a human oversight board. Even private jet companies, long insulated from public accountability, were quietly requesting consultation from Morgan Tech's equity architecture team, not out of fear, out of survival. Because the public wasn't just watching now, they were remembering. Back in the U.S., something more personal had begun to unfold. A group of first-generation students at Howard University's business school launched a mentorship series called the 1A Initiative. Their goal: equip young professionals of color with tools to navigate elite corporate spaces with the poise, silence, and precision Celeste had modeled. Their first guest speaker, Celeste Morgan. She didn't bring slides. She didn't rehearse. She simply walked in, sat down, and said, "I want you to understand this. You don't have to raise your voice to own a room, but you do have to know exactly where the pressure points are. The system's not afraid of anger. It's afraid of documentation." Hands shot up. Dozens of questions followed, but one young woman in the back stayed quiet until the end. When the room cleared, she approached Celeste, voice low. "My mom was a flight attendant. For years. She said they trained her to smile more at white men. She said she used to believe that was just good service." Celeste met her eyes. "And what does she think now?" The girl smiled. "She watched your press conference twice. She said it felt like someone finally knocked on the door she'd been locked behind for 30 years. Celeste didn't reply. She just nodded. Another lock had turned. At Stratus HQ, the ethics dashboard now occupied an entire wall. Not just charts and graphs, but live, rolling feedback from passengers, equity ratings, anonymized service scoring, trend lines showing real-time bias detection, and at the top, one number: Seat 1A visibility rating 100%. Every passenger in that seat now received an optional follow-up interview, not to check for special treatment, but to ensure they were treated just like everyone else. Because that was the real revolution. Not to make 1A special, to make it equal. Celeste boarded a flight to São Paulo 6 weeks later. No media, no entourage. Seat 3C. She passed seat 1A without stopping. A black teenage girl sat there alone, earbuds in, watching something on her phone. A crew member approached. "Miss Evans," the attendant said, bending gently at the waist. "Your pre-ordered vegan entree has been confirmed. Sparkling or still?" The girl looked up, blinking. She smiled wide. "Still. Please." The attendant returned in less than 60 seconds. No delays. No hesitation. No hierarchy of worth. Celeste kept walking. She sat down in 3C, pulled out a notepad, and wrote 5 words. "We don't sit to beg." She underlined it once, then looked out the window. Above the clouds, systems feel untouchable. But Celeste had proved otherwise. You could reach the sky and still hold the ground accountable. The last flight wasn't marked by turbulence or confrontation. There were no whispers in the aisles, no murmurs of suspicion behind champagne flutes. There were no clipped smiles concealing discomfort, no sideways glances toward the only black woman in first class. The final flight, Stratus Air Flight 001 from Cape Town to New York, felt almost still, as if the system, after years of bracing against change, had finally exhaled. Celeste Morgan boarded quietly. No camera crews followed her. No staff member stumbled trying to identify her. She wasn't seated in 1A. This time, she had chosen seat 2D, not because she was avoiding symbolism, but because she no longer needed it. The symbol had already served its purpose. Now it was about structure. Before takeoff, the lead crew member approached with a calm confidence and a single clipboard. She stood beside Celeste with humility, but not fear. "Miss Morgan," she said, "my name is Mira Chen. I'm the new Director of Cultural Excellence in Cabin Experience. I'll be observing service procedures on this flight, if that's all right with you." Celeste nodded. Of course. Mira handed her a sealed folder. The final implementation reports from Project 1A. All metrics are in. "Would you like to review now or after takeoff?" Celeste took the folder and set it aside. Later. For now. She just wanted to feel what the sky was like without needing to study it. 30 minutes into the flight. She glanced around the cabin. No hierarchy. Passengers of all backgrounds were addressed by name, offered options, handed menus printed in multiple languages. The attendants weren't performing. They were present. She turned her gaze to the window, recalling how far the journey had been from that untouched tray on Flight 917 to this moment of quiet, structured dignity. Her smartwatch buzzed softly. It was Aaliyah. Confirmed, Site 1A will be retired as an internal symbol within Stratus Air training manuals. Moving forward, all seats will be referred to by passenger, not prestige. Underneath was a second note. Also your words, "I didn't touch it," have been etched inside the Geneva Ethics Room plaque. Celeste closed the notification. She smiled not because of pride, but because of clarity. In the rear galley, Mira watched her team move seamlessly down the aisle. New staff, new energy, and a new script that didn't require anyone to memorize status codes just to recognize people. She had joined Stratus because of Celeste, but now she stayed because of what had changed after Celeste left each room. That's what real power looked like. Not in who stood at the microphone, but in who no longer had to stand at all to be seen. Somewhere over the Atlantic. Celeste finally opened the report, page after page of reform metrics, equity compliance ratings, crew testimony logs, and cultural audit summaries. She stopped at one line in particular, reported bias incidents over last 30 days 0. And below that, voluntary staff participation in extended training 87%. No threats, no penalties, just willingness, just alignment. She closed the folder. That was enough. As the plane began its descent into New York, an attendant stopped by her seat. "Miss Morgan, would you like anything before landing?" Celeste glanced at the tray. Lobster bisque. Prime steak, perfectly arranged, the same meal she'd been denied so long ago. She looked at the attendant and shook her head gently. "No, thank you." The attendant hesitated. "Are you sure?" Celeste smiled. "I'm not hungry anymore." As the landing gear extended, a soft voice echoed from the front of the cabin. "Mira Chen, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for flying with Stratus Air. Today's flight marks a special occasion, not just our route anniversary, but the first full implementation of our new Equity First service model." She paused. "And we owe that to someone among us." Passengers turned to look as Mira continued. "She's not just a leader. She's not just a visionary. She's the reason every passenger, regardless of background, language, or seat number, is seen." Then, without flourish, she said, "Miss Celeste Morgan, thank you for showing us how to serve not just people, but purpose." The cabin applauded. Celeste didn't stand. She didn't wave. She simply nodded once. On the ground, as the wheels kissed the runway. Her phone buzzed one final time. It was from a former crew member. I was silent when it mattered. I've started speaking now. Thank you for not giving up on the rest of us. Celeste responded with 3 words. Keep speaking forward. The doors opened. Celeste stepped into the New York terminal not as an icon, but as a woman who had made change feel quiet, structured, permanent. The system hadn't fallen. It had evolved. Because of her. Because of that tray. Because of one seat where silence once sat. And from this day forward, every seat would remember her even if her name was never spoken aloud again. 1 year later, the headlines had long faded. The noise, the trending hashtags, the think pieces all archived under a digital timestamp. Seat 1A was no longer trending. And yet, everywhere it mattered, it was still present. Not as a slogan, as a standard. In first-class cabins around the world, meals arrived evenly. Names were spoken with equal care. No longer was politeness reserved for those who resembled legacy. Courtesy had become code. But the truest legacy wasn't in service logs. It was in people. At the annual Global Service Equity Summit in Singapore, a quiet video opened the morning keynote. No narration, no dramatic score, just a sequence of moments a tray delivered on time. A passenger smiled at sincerely. A name spoken with warmth. A child in seat 2B addressed respectfully while her mother in 2A received the same champagne as the man in 1C. The screen faded to black. One line appeared. We don't speak for the system. We let the system speak for itself. Celeste Morgan applause rose. But Celeste wasn't on stage. She was in the back row, as always. Unseen, but unmistakably felt. Later that afternoon, she met with a young team of policy interns from various countries. They sat cross-legged around her in a circle, excited and nervous. One of them, a 22-year-old from Nairobi named Lillian, finally asked, "Do you ever regret not fighting louder, not calling the press immediately, not flipping the table?" Celeste leaned back in her chair. "I didn't need noise," she said. "I needed accuracy. Rage is fuel, but design is force." She looked around the circle. Most people wait for fairness to be granted. I waited for it to become architecture. They scribbled every word. Another intern asked, "How did you stay calm when it felt personal?" Celeste looked at her gently. It was personal, but so is everything we allow to continue. That evening, she walked alone along the riverbank. She thought about the flight. Not the chaos, not the humiliation, but the silence. That frozen moment when she looked at a cold sandwich and realized this is not just a meal. This is a mirror. She thought about Becky Whitmore, where she was now no longer in aviation, no longer protected by performance. She didn't hate her. She just didn't carry her anymore. Reform had taken care of the rest. And she thought about Aaliyah, still at Morgan Tech, now Chief Integrity Officer. Her job, preventing harm before it becomes viral. That was the real power designing a system where the next Celeste never had to hold her breath to be served what she already earned. Back in the States, a high school debate team performed a dramatized case study of Seat 1A. The lead speaker, a 16-year-old boy named Isaiah, concluded with Celeste Morgan didn't need to shout, because when you sit in power long enough, it starts shaping the room. When the world expected her to move, she made the ground shift beneath them instead. The audience gave a standing ovation. Isaiah's mother watched, tears in her eyes. She had been a flight attendant for 20 years. On the anniversary of Flight 917, Stratus Air unveiled a new plaque in their Geneva terminal lounge. It wasn't made of gold or granite. It was brushed steel, clean, and minimalist. Engraved were just 2 lines. She didn't finish the meal. She finished the silence. In honor of Celeste Morgan, every staff member who passed that plaque was required to recite one principle from Project 1A's Equity Charter, not as punishment, as promise. Celeste never asked for legacy. She asked for systems. But legacy came anyway, not in the form of awards or headlines. It came in tiny, almost invisible moments, a crew member pausing to reintroduce themselves to a passenger whose name they mispronounced, a policy board catching a bias pattern before it became a crisis, a flight supervisor removing preferential seating from a familiar face and offering it based on booking order, a little girl in Lagos pointing at a picture of Celeste in a textbook and whispering, "She made the sky fair." On her final public appearance before stepping down from advisory work, Celeste walked on stage with no speech, no script, and no suit. She wore a simple dress, no logos, no statements, and in her closing words, she left a reminder. You don't need permission to be respected. You don't need cameras to be seen. You don't need noise to shift power. You just need to know that when the system forgets your name, your silence can still speak in volumes. She stepped off stage. The crowd stood, not because she asked them to, but because they could now see what standing looked like. Because of one woman, because of one seat, because someone, somewhere, finally said, "I understand now." Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.